run into the claims technology empowers us. Of course, we've never been so disempowered as it's gotten more and more technological. And I'm not saying that's the only factor, but some of these things seem like less than coincidence. Another one is we're more and more connected. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that as people have fewer friends, visit their friends less often. Single person households get to live alone more and more. That's just sort of skyrocketing as a figure, by the way. Gee, all this connection. It's a strange kind of connection. In society, the opposite is happening. And another one, among others, is the other. There's this richness of variety. And of course it's useful. I mean, I do that. I mean, you can get on there and get information right away. It's very handy, of course. But richness, otherness, we live in the most standardized society that has ever existed, and it's getting more so. Behind that, I think, is the argument that Brian referred to in passing, and there are many ways to talk about it. Most frontally, technology is neutral. The whole discussion is how we use it. How are we going to use it in a good way? It's just a tool. But that's completely false. It's actually always been false, I would say, because society is pretty abstract, but you can look at the technology as a physical embodiment of the society. You can see it, you can read it, you can touch it actually. It's the incarnation of society in terms of the you have systems of high tech, the modern grid, the whole thing like that. The values are pretty easy to see. There's a certain coldness, there's a certain distancing, there's an almost total reliance on experts. Whereas if we, by contrast, go to tools, simple tools, maybe stone tools, which anyone could and did make, regardless of gender, for example, little or no division of labor, well, what values are there? Intimacy, playfulness, you can use it however you like. You don't have to follow the machine parameters. There's a closeness. There are things like that. Flexibility would be another one in there. And another thing to be just a little bit more grounded. A primary thing I think which makes it not at all neutral is that it looks all clean and shiny to us, but it doesn't float down from heaven. It comes from the factories and the smelters and the mines and the assembly lines and the warehouses. It's a function of industrialization. If you don't have the industrialism, you don't have no technology. It's that obvious, it's that simple. And for anarchists, it just leads to other questions or other points. A friend of mine in Detroit used to say, anybody here want to go down in the mines? Then no, we're all mostly, I guess, middle-class people. No, I'd rather not. I'd rather be a writer or something like that. No thanks. Well, then where are we going to get those millions of people to go down in the mines so that we can have toxic cell phones and everything else? Obviously, they're forced, primarily by the economy. They're coerced into being down there. They wouldn't be there otherwise. I think that's kind of obvious. They wouldn't be risking their lives at drudgery and toxic work and so on. Then, especially in the context of this, the anarchist thing, who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? Or who's going to force somebody else to do that? Doesn't sound too anarchist to force somebody else to do what you're not going to do. I never throw that out. Some Marxist or somebody wants to explain that to me. I wonder. It doesn't seem to work. I often think of one of the later works of Freud, as a matter of fact, Civilization and its Discontents, which more precisely is domestication and its discontents. That's actually what it's about. And he pointed out that in order to have symbolic culture, in order to get people working, they've got to be domesticated. They can't be just running around out there in the forest and working very little and having that sort of life before domestication, before agriculture. But he said, as you may know, he pointed out that that's a very painful deal, that wound that never heals. Like breaking a horse, you tame it so you can ride it. Well, for humans, according to Freud, it's really the main motor of neurosis. So he said, the more civilization you have, the more neurosis. The fullness of civilization is the depth of neurosis. He wrote that in 1930. let's check, let's take a look and see if that's right. Yep, it sure is. It's totally true. In fact, you might have been a little looking through rose-colored glasses on that one. I mean, it's worse than that, really. I don't want to go on endlessly. Let me just mention one or two other things. In terms of the primitivist thing, you could, as I did, pit it against the Marxist or classical anarchist point of view. You can say, and I'm not just saying it because I'm surrounded by class war folks here, but I actually think that in some ways it's kind of a deepening of class theory or class struggle approach, and that maybe a reorienting of it to some degree. I think that's somewhat valid because, as Dan alluded to, if you look at this crisis, this horrendous crisis of the environment, and tend to look at it in terms of the most primary social institutions, two, namely division of labor, probably the most primary one, and domestication. That is division of labor or specialization. First of all, you could say it's the origin of class society. I think that's fairly logical. When division of labor itself into roles for production, even way back, you are seeing really divided society. You're seeing class society initiated at that point. It's not a matter of refusing the idea of class society, but maybe it's helpful to look at the origins of it. In terms of domestication, in this respect, I think it's interesting to posit that as the origin of private property. For example, when people stopped essentially taking what nature gives and cultivating the land, doing the work on the land, then you're growing something, and I think one is more or less valid. Somebody then comes along and takes what you've grown, and you go, hey, I put in the work, this is mine. I'll put a fence here, I'll meet you with a spear if I have to, but and so, I mean, really, that's private property at perhaps its earliest point. That's where that is. That isn't really in existence before domestication. We talk about territorialization and how much there was of that, how little the nuances and so forth, but there's no private property. In very, very general terms, we now see that your basic anthropology text, and this is extremely general, I realize here, but life for a couple of million years, perhaps as many as that, before domestication was largely one of not much work, no organized violence, war that is, an ethos of sharing, food sharing. It sounds like just a utopian agenda to push through, or if you've taken an anthropology course later, and people have said to me, I didn't believe that stuff, it just sounded too perfect or something. It wasn't perfect, That's textbook stuff. That's the orthodoxy, again, very general terms. That's not really up to, it's not a question, actually. Let's see. I just want to kind of make a pitch for the spiritual, and this could be, and probably should be, we could discuss what we have been trying to learn from the indigenous dimension, not to be in any way wannabes to co-opt their practices at all, but to maybe see that one key thing that's been lacking in politics or anti-politics, whatever you want to call it, has been spiritual. I remember a little while ago being in Croatia, and somebody said, I think this green energy movement is at base a spiritual movement. And as a scarred ex-Catholic, I said, huh? Tell me more. I don't, so what do you mean by again? To notice lots of things. For example, some of the fighters that I really recognize or respect a lot, speaking of non-native people, are very deeply spiritual. I just throw this out. We've been fearful of going there. It doesn't rule out other stuff. It could, and it does for some people, of course, but it could be a missing thing. I don't know much else what to say about it, but I think there's something that we've kind of been overlooking and afraid to cultivate.